Well, school's out for summer, at least in most of these places here in Nebraska. Hello, everybody. Sam McKewon along with Evan Bland and Tom Shatel for the Pick Six podcast. But college baseball is still rolling. It is going to be an interesting couple of weeks for Nebraska baseball and a magical run to the Big Ten Tournament Championship up in Omaha. Evan and Tom were both there, and I think it was pretty special to read about it. I know that they'll be able to talk about how special it was to watch. And then we'll talk a little bit about the most recent settlement between the NCAA and the multiple lawsuits that's going to affect NIL. This will be the first of many conversations we have about it. We're not going to solve all the world's problems as it relates to college athletics today, but we'll begin that conversation for sure. I want to remind everybody to subscribe to the Omaha World-Herald. If you're not a subscriber, then you can always go to www.omaha.com/subscribe. We're going to have coverage of all kinds of stuff, including Nebraska baseball's run in Stillwater. Evan Bland will be on site there. He'll be one of the few people who is. Nobody has provided better coverage of Nebraska baseball this year. And of course, we'll have all the recruiting coverage in June of Nebraska's camps, its commits, its offers. It's going to be a busy June. And next week, probably, we'll talk more about that recruiting month that's coming up. Gentlemen, how are we? Evan, Tom, how's it going?
Ready to go.
Doing great. It continues the tradition of Memorial Day weekend being as busy as any fall Saturday for me, but a lot of fun, a lot of great weather. I wasn't grilling or golfing or anything, but man, I'm sure there were a lot of people doing just that. What a weekend.
Certainly was. Evan, as you think about the things that you've covered in Nebraska baseball since you started with the World-Herald, I think it's been about 7 years. Where does the Big Ten tournament run that the Huskers just completed, winning their first Big Ten tournament ever, rank in the things that you've covered and the way that they played?
Pretty high. I think the gold standard probably still, even though they didn't win, was the Arkansas Regional in 21. I think that opened some eyes to what the program could do. They got the one win over the number one national seed. That was a really special moment. But I think this probably has to be second behind that. And I put it out there on social media, but I felt like the thing that really made it special was how the fans got to join in. And because it's been kind of a weird run for Nebraska baseball where the regionals have been on the road for the last decade plus in the Big Ten. They've clinched regular season titles on the road. There've just been very few moments where like you could have this cathartic interaction between fan and team where they're doing the high fives around the edge or they're hanging out extra long for autographs. And like this was a week of that. The Tuesday night game, obviously you get run ruled and how out of character that was for that team. But then you come back and you could just kind of feel the momentum build. And you had this moment Sunday when fans could just celebrate with the team and nobody wanted to leave. The fans were on the field or around the field. The players were on the field. And I thought the moment when Gabe Swanson hit that go-ahead double in the top of the ninth was one of the bigger goosebump moments I've had following that team because everyone knew it was coming. Like everyone was ready for it. It was a full count. The crowd collectively rose to their feet on that pitch. And then he delivered the go-ahead run and Nebraska pulled it out. So a really special week. One of those kind of core memory weeks, in my opinion. Like if you're a kid and you saw that, like you're probably going to feel similarly to how kids felt in the 2000s when Nebraska was hosting regionals. So I thought, and from that respect, it was a really big week for the program. They were going to go to the NCAA tournament anyway, but just the interaction that they were able to have locally to get momentum going for Husker Nation, I thought was right up near the top.
What was interesting too is Wilbo went for it. You know, he pitched Brett Sears. He probably didn't have to do that. But with a one-run lead, he brought in this dude, and he really wanted that tournament title. And I wasn't sure going into the weekend whether they'd be like, hey, you know what, we're just going to kind of gear this back. We've proven that we're a decent team. We're going to be a 2 seed. We'll just let the chips fall where they may. But the reality is they went for it. And at the beginning of the week, looking at message boards, there were words after the Ohio State game that said "Fire Wilbo, fire Wilbo." Tom, it feels like nobody's talking about that now. That this is this is the kind of thing, this kind of run proves him right and also proves Rob Childress right.
Yeah, I don't listen. I don't read message boards, and Sam, I wish you wouldn't either. But nothing good ever comes of those, and they really don't represent the fan base. But I think people were certainly, if not calling for his job, we're getting frustrated and a little restless. Yeah, the Arkansas regional a few years ago was fantastic. Coming off the league title, it was an early shot of sugar for Husker baseball fans. Hey, this new coach, it's like old times. Then the next year they didn't go to the Big Ten tournament, and they didn't go back to a regional for 2 more years. And I feel like the conference tournament, in most places is no big deal. But I think Nebraska made it a big deal when they used to win it every other year. And it's a little different. It's almost like a regional format in that it's a week-long event, and it's and to have it here in Omaha, I really think that there are like two things that Will Ball obviously wants to go to the World Series, but in lieu of that, I think winning a conference tournament and winning a regional are kind of the accomplishments that are going to get people's attention. I don't think winning the Big Ten regular season, while it is a great accomplishment or a good accomplishment, when you can win a league title over a season, doesn't really move the needle. I don't think anybody really cares that much about it. They want to do it, but to me, winning the conference tournament in Omaha, where you get to dogpile and celebrate with the fans, it's a major needle mover for Nebraska baseball people. And now I think winning a regional, hosting a regional, is certainly next on the agenda. But this is a thing that the Evan's right. They haven't dogpiled at home, and they used to do that. They whenever they won a regional or whenever, certainly when they won a super regional at home, which they did 3 times. And when they go to Oklahoma City, when they did it down there, but yeah, this is kind of, if you're old enough to remember those days, this is sort of like that. And the way they played last week was sort of like that. 2005, 2002, 2001, where they were just kind of this unstoppable force, like Saturday, not necessarily game one, but game two Saturday, you knew that they were going to win, and they knew they were going to win. They knew they were going to get the hits. Everybody was hitting. There was just this feeling in the crowd, and just a lot of momentum. And that's kind of how they used to treat conference tournaments. So it was a great week for Nebraska baseball. I think it renewed a lot of faith in Will Bolt and what they're doing. And now I think they got a shot this week. How good a shot? I don't know. But there'll be years where they go to regional. I didn't think they had much of a shot at all. The way this team's built and the way they played last weekend, they got a shot. They got a shot. I think that they can get there Sunday and Monday, and take their swings and see what happens. But it ain't gonna be easy though. The Big 12 and SEC are a couple levels up from the Big Ten. They're not playing Indiana this week. We're not playing Penn State. I saw West Virginia kill Penn State a couple weeks ago. It's a different deal. They're gonna have to play their A game every inning and really raise their level. But it's certainly there.
I would add two quick, like, and I may have mentioned this on our CWS pod, but I think it bears repeating that, like, Nebraska is going to a regional now where they're playing a Florida team that's been to 16 straight tournaments. Oklahoma State's in there going to their 11th straight tournament. Nebraska, as you said, Tom, hasn't been in a regional in a couple of years. I think the value of the Big Ten tournament was it closed a lot of that experience gap for these guys. They hadn't played in front of crowds like they saw in Omaha last week, 10,000 on Saturday, 13,000 on Sunday. They got a taste of elimination games, the regional format. I think that was the real value. Like they were going to be a regional 2 seed, whether they went 0-2 last week or whether they won the event. But what they gained was like postseason experience for this roster that really only had Kyle Perry on it, who had thrown in any meaningful postseason situation for Nebraska. So to me, that changes the outlook on Nebraska next week because now they've done it. Like they're not kind of the new team to this situation. They've just gone through that atmosphere, and we'll just see how much of a difference that makes when they go to Oklahoma State, which is going to have a pretty solid atmosphere on its own.
So let's get into it. Nebraska's first game is against Florida on Friday at 2 p.m. And then Oklahoma State plays later in that evening. The winner will obviously play each other on Saturday night. But let's get into it a little bit. The reality is, Nebraska's playing a team that went 28-27 this season. They went 13-17 in the SEC, but 13-17 in the SEC is not like 13-17 in any other league, like Tom just said. So here's the question, Evan, and this goes directly to you. How good is Florida, really? How good are they compared to the team that they were last year when they made the CWS final? And how good is Jack Caglione, their best pitcher?
Yeah, that is the question because Nebraska got or Florida gets the benefit of the doubt from the NCAA selection committee because it played the #1 strength of schedule in the country. And I think you have to look at their numbers and their strengths and weaknesses through kind of a similar lens where you say, yeah, they're toward the bottom of the SEC in a lot of categories, but this is an SEC that just sent a record 11 teams into the NCAA tournament. So, I think their clear strength is their ability to hit the home run. Jack Caglione, as you mentioned, is the star. He's going to be a high first-round pick here this summer in the Major League Baseball draft. You look at the rest of their lineup, though, and it's mostly guys who can hit the long ball, but they don't walk much. Nobody else who's a regular in that lineup sitting above 270. So they don't steal bases. They don't pressure you in a lot of ways. What they do is create instant offense. They're top 10 in home runs per game, a little more than 2 per. So that to me is the challenge for Nebraska, is limiting that. Their rotation is hit and miss. They're going to start a guy, a true freshman named Liam Peterson on Friday, who has had a few good outings late in the season against teams that are now national seeds in Tennessee and Kentucky.
So they're not going to start Caglione on Friday.
They're not starting Caglione on Friday, no. He's been later in the week. He's a two-way guy. Typically, people might remember Jake Myers kind of did the same thing where you save him, that guy, for later in the series. So no, Caglione's not going Friday. That's what their coach, Kevin O'Sullivan, said on a radio show yesterday. So they're pitching, like their key, I think, for Florida has been trying to find a way to get length out of their starters. So if Peterson goes 5 or 6, then they feel like they have some back end guys that can handle things the rest of the way. If he goes 3 or 4 and they have to find a way to bridge that gap in the middle, then I think if you're Nebraska, you're really cooking at that point because they don't maybe have the bullpen depth to overcome some of that. You look at their struggles this season, it's actually been similar to Nebraska's. It's been the midweek stuff. They've had some pretty good top end performances, but they haven't been able to carry that over. So it's a team that hits, it's a team that has a few solid arms, but really nothing that's going to blow you away relative to previous Florida teams.
In Oklahoma State, this appears to be a good Oklahoma State team. Let's be clear. I think 3 times in the last 7 or 8 years, Oklahoma State has failed to emerge from its own region, including last year when Oral Roberts, which made it to the College World Series, was a 4 seed in that region, beat Oklahoma State in the opener, and then emerged from that region. Oklahoma State is not good in this setting. I don't know why. They went to the College World Series 3 or 4 years ago, but generally speaking, they are a very good regular season team that underperforms in the postseason. What is this version of Oklahoma State like?
Well, a key difference and the reason why they think they can go further this year is because they actually do have some decent pitching. They're co-aces. They have a guy named Brian Holiday, who was a transfer, and a guy named Sam Garcia, who was a transfer. These guys both have 100 plus strikeouts. They're two of the better pitchers in the country. And you look at Oklahoma State the last couple of years, their team ERAs were in like the 70th nationally, 90th nationally. This team comes in 11th with a collective ERA. So they've got the top end pitching. They have the the depth of arms that they haven't in the past. And then the lineup kind of is what you would expect a Cowboy lineup to be. A lot of power. They kind of take the major league true outcomes approach. So they're going to walk a lot. They're going to hit for power. And then they don't mess around too much with the small ball stuff either. They don't really steal much or sacrifice much. So it kind of feels like you're facing a major league lineup, and it kind of feels like you're facing a major league staff that's going to strike out quite a few guys, limit the walks. And I think they, to hear some of their interviews, they feel like they have a chip on their shoulder because they have hosted the previous 2 years. They
That's
haven't made
right.
it into their own regional. So
Yep.
I think there's an emotional component that they have going for them as well.
Dom, when you've seen, a bunch of these over the years, probably starting in what was it, 99, when Nebraska played Stanford in the Super Regional, I think that year, or maybe it was 98. I can't even remember anymore. But you've watched 25 years of high level Nebraska baseball. You feel like this team can make a magical run, maybe like that Creighton team did all those years ago, or like Nebraska's first team to make the College World Series, which wasn't necessarily an elite team, but full of a lot of grinders.
Yeah, I think they can, but they have to play at their highest level. They and get a couple guys hot like last week, where it just felt like whenever certain guys were up at the plate that they were going to get it done. But there are a couple times where they've, like the 2 games where they gave up 8 runs in the last 2 innings. You just hope that doesn't come back again. That those days are over. I just feel like Florida is just happy to be there. I mean, they always want to be in the postseason, but they really had a rough bounce back here from the World being in the championship series last year. They struggled all year, and I think they're very, very happy to be there. I don't know what that means for them, but they know how to play in the postseason. I just feel like the competition level is up where you have to they'll have to match it, and I think they can. I really think Brett Sears is a key to this whole regional. Just getting out of the gate strong. Don't let Florida hit home runs. Don't let them get the lead. And knock them down early. And I really think if they can win Friday and get into that winners bracket early, that it seems to have some confidence. Oklahoma State's looking at Nebraska in the Big Ten is like no big deal. They'll handle it, and so I think Nebraska will have the chip on their shoulder thing again. Another week. So, but the pitchers have to be really good. The defense was very good, and it has to keep up, and they've got to get to the timely hits again. It's just another week like last week, only it's a lot tougher. So, but yeah, absolutely, it's a team I think that can get to Sunday and Monday, and I take their shot.
Yeah, the team I was referencing, now that I was going back through the schedule, the 2002 Nebraska team finished 47-21. They probably weren't as good as the 2000 team that lost to Stanford or the 2001 team that went to the CWS, but they got a favorable regional. The teams they played, I mean, people would be astonished by the regionals back then. They're not like they are today. They played Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Marist, and Southwest Missouri State. And that's just not, that team is not Missouri State, obviously, but that's just not the caliber of teams that they're facing these days. And then they beat Richmond in a super regional to make the College World Series. And then when they got to the CWS, their pitching staff was outclassed and pounded pretty good by Clemson and South Carolina. But like this team, Evan, it feels like they're on a run, and maybe, just maybe, like Tom said, if they play their very best and they get a break, like Oklahoma State just doesn't play as well as they should, that if they win this weekend, I feel strongly that whoever they're going to face next weekend isn't going to be as good as what they're facing this weekend.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And their draw is better, and they earned a better draw, quite frankly. I mean, Oklahoma State was a team that was a fringe national seed before they made the run in the Big 12 tournament and won that event. So it's not like they've been world beaters all year. I mean, they're solid, but they're not outstanding, as we've mentioned. They have had their moments where they've come up short. And I think a couple of things for Nebraska that have been trending upward. One, defensively, they've been much better in the second half of the year, which you have to be for the postseason. And then, offensively, like the thing that's been holding them back has been the ability to finish innings. So like you talk about setting up innings and knocking them down. They've been able to do the first part of that, but the second part has been a struggle, which is why I think the emergence of Gabe Swanson and the way that Josh Caron has heated up has been so important, is because there are so many table setters on this team, so many guys that can grind out at bats, take their walks, execute hit and runs. What they haven't had a ton of is run producers. And so for Gabe Swanson to be that guy who's hitting long balls, who's driving doubles into the gap, the way that Caron's seeing the ball right now, like to me, that's the huge difference, is having those guys drive in those runs, have a little bit more power than they've shown during the regular season. And if they can carry that over into a regional where you get a little more instant offense, maybe you have that key 2-run home run or whatever, so you don't have to string together 3 singles. I think that's the difference. And so if they can take the formula they've had late in the year, especially at the Big Ten tournament, I think they have the pieces absolutely to hang with Oklahoma State, Florida, and whoever may come upon their schedule.
All right, Evan's going to have full coverage, obviously, this weekend, and if they're able to emerge, it should be one hell of a story. They were a lot of fun to watch at Big Ten tournament. We'll just have to see, like you just never know what's going to happen this weekend with Nebraska baseball. Okay, let's move on. And this will be the first of several conversations. We don't have to solve all the problems today. The NCAA had a settlement on multiple lawsuits. We won't get too far into the weeds on the nature of those, but the main one is called the House. It's a House lawsuit. The last name of the person is House. And they were able to sort of bring several of these lawsuits together, settle those lawsuits, and create a structure that not only has a look-back payment structure, but also has a forward payment structure that allows athletic departments to allocate up to 20% of their annual revenues, which in the case of Nebraska would be 22, 23, $24 million, somewhere in there, given what they've brought in to student athletes for revenue share. And that's a big chunk of change. There are many questions that still remain, and I want to ask just the initial conversation here about a couple. I think one of the first ones is whether or not a system that apportions $20 to $22 million to an athletic department to share with student athletes, is that a system that can benefit Nebraska, or does that system ultimately work against Nebraska somewhere down the line?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. Right now, nobody knows who's going to get the money and how much and how many. So, my feeling is okay. This is $20 to $21 million a year. I guess a year. That's coming out of the TV money. This is not NIL. You can still have NIL, and NIL will be more important than ever because you're going to need NIL because you can't pay everybody. and you certainly can't pay everybody the same money. I don't think they're going to pay the women's basketball players the same if they're going to pay the quarterback, or the I don't want to single out any teams at but yeah, not everybody's going to get the same money. So, but I think they're going to have about a year to figure this out. Yesterday, UCLA came out and said that they're planning to start the fall 2025. So they're giving themselves a year to get it figured out. And but yesterday, the SEC commissioner at SEC spring meetings, Greg Sankey, said, well, what about the IRS? What about if you're getting money, you're an employee? What about this? What about that? You're going to get taxed. Do you want to get taxed? I mean, and so these are questions that have to be answered by who? The NCAA? Are they going to step forward and do this? A lot of questions. But will it help? I think it should help because this is not NIL. NIL is separate from this. So you're going to have revenue sharing. Athletes are going to get both. But I think the NIL can be used again to supplement those who maybe don't get as much. And people are asking about Title IX, and we don't know. I mean, does this mean that Jordy Ball and Dylan Raiola are going to get the same money? I don't know. They might. Last year, Caitlin Clark got more than any men's basketball player in the country, probably. I don't know anybody even said that or even talked about that. But so there's your Title IX right there. She made more than anybody. So it's but to me, Title IX means opportunity, not necessarily equal money, because in 1972, when it was passed, nobody was getting anything. And in fact, freshmen couldn't play back then. But I think it's, to answer your question, I think it's an advantage because Nebraska will have both. People in the Big 12 and the ACC will not have $20 million a year to add to the, Iowa State's athletic director, Jamie Powell, has already said, where am I going to find the $20 million? I mean, I've got it, but that money's going somewhere else right now. And if I pull $20 million out of my budget to pay athletes, then there's going to be they're probably going to be sports cut. There's going to be a lot of things cut. So the Big Ten and SEC will have this money, and yet you're going to see Troy Dannon go, okay, I just pulled $20 million out of the budget for this. How am I going to make up for it? So, but he's going to have more money to work with than a lot of other ADs around the country.
Evan, here's my question to you. Same kind of question, whether this is an advantage for Nebraska or if it's somewhat of a disadvantage going forward. Tom mentioned that NIL is probably not going away. Traditional NIL is probably something along the lines of what Nash Hutmaker is doing with the heating and cooling company, the Polar Bear, for whatever heating and cooling company. But part of what's happening with collectives is boosters are giving the collectives money, and then the collectives are dispensing the money to the roster, and the players on the roster are doing something very nominal in order to, quote unquote, make the money. The question becomes whether or not boosters want to keep giving the money to the collectives, right? If they can just give it to the school.
Well, yeah, I mean, the speculation is what happens to the collectives in this scenario. Like I've read where like maybe part of the original intent was for the collectives to go away because of the revenue sharing component. But what it sounds
like, absolutely, that's the intent. Yeah,
but I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I think what's going to happen is they're going to fold into the university in some way. There's kind of this idea that they're going to be like a marketing wing or a mouthpiece or a touch point for some of these student athletes. And we heard from Sean Patton, who's on staff with Nebraska, about as their GM, about how he's had those conversations with with the collectives and with the players. And so, it's a very, very fluid, ongoing thing. Like, I think, Nebraska, when you talk about whether it helps or hurts, I think it helps them in the sense that it hurts them less. Like, you're asking all these schools to cut out, as you said, 22, 23, 24 million a year from their budget. Nebraska is better equipped to handle that than most places, as a school that's not been in debt, as a school that's been more frugal and budget minded than most. I think maybe from a football standpoint, the thing that could hurt them a little bit is if what comes out of this is a roster limit, right? And if you talk about 85 or 100 or whatever that number is, if Nebraska can't have those additional walk-ons or those scholarship in kind players that are already on the roster now, that hurts the depth, especially at a place that wants to be a developmental program the way that Nebraska is. So there's so many offshoots that can come out of this thing. I think, to me, one of the best things potentially is transparency with the finances. If this is all under the umbrella of the university, then you would think that these would be numbers that could be known publicly. And we're not talking innuendo, and we're not in the shadows, and it's not rumor and hearsay. Like, to me, that would be the most refreshing part, is what's really going on here. Let's bring this stuff into the light and operate under a uniform set of rules.
I think that's very fair. You know why they want roster limits? You know why they're throwing it around? Title IX. So the issue that they've had for so long is that the participation numbers in football always put it out of whack. In most universities now, the enrollment numbers for females versus males is higher on the female end. It's 54-48, or some other places it's even higher than that. And yet the athletic participation is often skewed by football. At Nebraska, as people know, Henry Cordes wrote about this a couple of years ago, the swimming team and the track team added athletes that were mostly like practice athletes. They weren't even necessarily competition athletes, in order to balance out the Title IX numbers, right? Now, what Tom says about Title IX being about opportunity, I think the strictest interpretation of that is accurate. However, the reality is most of these schools don't pass the smell test there. Like, they don't have enough female athletes to match up with the male athletes because of football. Well, most of the football schools just don't pull it off. And so I think one of the workarounds that they're trying to talk about is, well, let's just take the roster limits down to football so that it's 20 more than the NFL. And in doing that, you can plausibly say that you're being Title IX compliant without having to distribute some of the money to some of the female athletes. Now, at Nebraska, in my opinion, they're going to, regardless of what they're able to do, whether they have to give money to the female athletes or not, they're going to. I think you're going to see Nebraska share revenue somewhat generously, even if they don't have to, with the volleyball team and the women's basketball team and the softball team, because I think that's been a core identity of Nebraska athletics for a really long time, was to support women's athletes. And so I don't know that you're necessarily going, I think you have to do the revenue sharing there versus NIL, because you can't really compel individual actors to necessarily pool their money together. Some of them might be doing it, but I don't think it's at the same level as the football roster bonuses or whatever you want to call those things. And so it'll be really interesting to watch to see how Title IX is interpreted. Is it going to be that you have to split the money evenly between male and female athletes? And if so, let's say you're talking about 11 million for the men and 11 million for the women. And I think we all have pretty good ideas of where the money would go for the female athletes. For the male athletes, it'd be a more interesting conundrum, because if you take $10 million and you divide it by 145, which is about how many players they have on the football roster, you get about $69 million, or $69,000 per player. I don't think they're going to be doing that. I don't think it's going to be a straight division. The question then becomes, and man, is this interesting? You got to hire people to do this. You have to divide out who's going to make what, how much they're going to make, which athletes are going to make it, what your strategy is. Are you strategizing to attract athletes with your revenue sharing or to retain athletes? Nebraska's been very high on retention. Then there's basketball. And here's one area, and I don't want to get off into a tangent on Creighton because we're going to talk about Creighton in a different podcast with John Wilson, but Creighton doesn't have Nebraska's money, but they also don't have to worry about football. So there's no money to give to the football team for Creighton. Nebraska basketball has a football team. And so how much money is left over for Fred Hoiberg and the crew to share revenue-wise? That's a question that I have in my mind. And how do they compete with Villanova and Creighton and schools that don't have to worry about football?
Yeah, but Sam, those schools don't have $20 million either. I mean, yeah, a lot of the money
I agree with
football,
you. I agree.
mean, it's basically, it's not free money, but it's coming out of the TV pool, which the Big East schools don't have, and the Big 12 and ACC to a lesser degree don't have that either. They're not getting that. They're not getting 80 million a year. So it's if you're Creighton and the Big East schools, this is going to be a problem because you're just not going to have the resources. Certainly, their boosters have money, but they don't have that kind of money where it's, it'll be interesting to see the football schools how much they give basketball. Because
Yes.
you're right, they are going to compete against the Big East schools, and but again, I don't know what revenue sharing means for the Big East schools, because where do they get the money to share revenue?
I don't know how much it would be.
Does it just come out of their budgets?
Yeah.
This is where I think NIL will stay around, and yes, maybe it will go in house. I still think this is where you're going to supplement certain athletes, because if everybody gets the same money, is that what's going to happen? Are we going to pay? Is there going to be a tier structure where the quarterbacks and maybe the quarterback position gets that money every year?
Exactly.
Whether Dylan Rayo is there or it's the next guy, they get that same money because you're the quarterback, or do you have to earn it? And does the star player for basketball get the same money? Do the starters for football get the same money? And then below them, it's a different number. And what about softball? What about volleyball? So, yeah, a lot of questions. But in terms of recruiting, if this is what's interesting is, the Big Ten schools recruit against the Big East on a lot of fronts in basketball. And if the Big Ten basketball players are getting money, or getting a salary, and the Big East players aren't, that's a recruiting advantage.
It is.
And that's where the term Power Two comes into play. And I don't think the Big Ten and SEC have any interest in being their own thing. Why would you? Why wouldn't you just keep it the way it is, where you have an advantage over everybody else? And you don't have to be Power Two. You're just Big Ten and SEC. And you don't have to change a thing. You don't have to play by different rules or anything. You're just getting your money, and nobody else is. So why change that? So, I don't think I haven't. There'll be a question I guess to ask Big Ten Commissioner Antonio Patini next month. But I don't think Greg Sankey has any appetite to be a Power Two. They're just kind of rolling along with the way they're going. So, all interesting stuff. We can have conversations about this, and I'm sure we will. But it's just started, and typically the media in this is going gaga over, the NCAA is, they're finally getting what they deserve, and amateurism is dead, and now the players are getting money, and then they're going off into the NBA finals again. Leaving us, people who cover college sports, to try to figure all this stuff out, sort through the rubble, and ask these questions. And that's what the administrators are doing too. What do we do? Okay, this got us out of the mess. Now what? And from Nebraska's standpoint, who makes a decision? Do they have a committee? Is it Troy Dannon and every head coach get in a room and kind of sort this thing out? Who gets what money? Great question.
That's a
And
great
how does that?
question.
How are
Yeah.
not? How are there not going to be hurt feelings in a situation? And you're absolutely right. What Evan said about the roster limits, that would hurt Nebraska. But this isn't going to be easy, and it's if every roster is the same and everything is, you become more like the NFL, more and more and more, and maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. I don't know.
Don't you think like college basketball, like to me, college basketball is going to be less affected than football? Like you see some of these NIL tournaments that are cropping up now where you win the tournament, you get $1 million in NIL. It's a smaller roster. So like I think the difference still has to be on the NIL side of things in terms of boosters and supporting that money too. Like to me, this kind of levels things out for football a little bit. It feels a little bit like it's not a salary cap, but it kind of feels like there's a baseline there for basketball. I don't know. Whatever's left over from the football schools, like I'm sure they'll get some, but to me, NIL is going to continue to reign supreme, maybe more, have more influence in that sport than it has relative to football, would be my thought.
It's
Well,
going to
it
be
just depends on what the NIL means, and does it mean what it means now, which is you're paying for players, and you're just buying players. If NIL goes in house, does that change? Does it become the I go to Winley Clothing and or the places in Lincoln, I go try on a suit and I get a little money to advertise for them, or does it mean we're going to pay you $500,000? I can't imagine in-house NIL would do that. Would they? Some places would. Some places may be very happy to buy players in-house. Right now, it's not in-house. It's this separate NIL is sort of this separate thing. It's outside the rules in some ways, and so I think you're right, Evan. But I don't know how if NIL goes in-house. Are there NIL tournaments? And we have a whole other conversation. The private investment firms are coming into play now. Schools are signing up with these, the whatever you want to call them,
Private equity, yeah.
private equity, and they're gonna go into debt doing that because those people want their money back. But they're signing up to basically get these loans or to get the infusion of money from them to help out. That doesn't seem like a very good idea to me, but bringing private business and like I said, those people are they want results, they want money back, and so I just don't know if public institutions were not made for that. It feels like sports is becoming way too important, and if you're going to get into that area, so like I said, I don't know where this is going. My hope is that it all blows up and we go back to the Big Eight, but I probably won't get my wish.
You never know. In 5 years, we may get there. Okay, I think that's a good start on the NIL conversation, which I think is going to go all summer long. Again, full coverage in Nebraska baseball this weekend in the Stillwater Regional. For Evan and Tom, I'm Sam. Keep listening to the Pick Six podcast and reading us at omaha.com. Thanks, Husker fans.